in person for some of it, which is just unavoidable. So if tomorrow morning I might might finally finish the process, I have to be in the office for that.
We're live now.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this special meeting of the Mahone Bay Town Council to begin the discussions on budget. Council, welcome. Beautiful evening. Great weather for talking about budgets, I'm sure. You have an agenda that was emailed to you. Entertain a motion to approve the agenda as presented. Councillor Wilson, Councillor Feeney, thank you. Moved and seconded. All in favor? The motion is carried. Let's go right to the agenda. There's one item on it, presentation of the draft 2020-2021 operating and capital budgets. You received an email with the 111-page document, which I'm sure was great bathroom reading over the weekend. And with that, we'll ask the CAO and or our manager of finance to lead us through the weeds.
Luke, it's over to you. I guess I'll just thank Luke for all of his work on this. It is quite a process, going back and forth with staff on estimates, gathering everything together, and then making sense of it. So thank you very much, Luke. And you're in the hot seat for tonight. My minute-taking job in Mo's absence is very easy. You approve the agenda. Now I just get to sit back.
Okay, so the first thing that I'll do is I'll pull up the budget document.
And I guess while Luke is doing that, I'll just note for anybody who's watching along, because councilors know, but we do have a second budget meeting scheduled for this Thursday at 7 p.m. And so tonight's meeting is essentially Luke presenting the budget document, and then we'll have some questions for clarity. Council members may have some questions, but the purpose of Thursday's meeting is to discuss that document. So you have a little time to digest.
Okay, so we'll start off, and I'll just start off by saying that I think tonight I'll just sort of go through the budget sort of page by page, section by section. I'll go over a few notes that I have. And before we move on to the next section, we'll just take a minute to, if there are any sort of clarification points or anything, we can discuss that at that time. So without further ado, we'll get right to work. So on the page here on your screen, it's just the total summary page. Overall, the budget's not really changing that much. There's a bit of change up here in the revenue section, but we'll get into that later. Expenses are not a lot of movement, not a lot of action there. This page here is just a high-level summary of the projected capital budget as it stands right now, and how it's broken out over the various departments of the town. So once again, we'll get into that in further detail further on in the presentation. And then we'll just get a couple graphical representations of the information there just presented above to, take a look at and wrap your head around it even further if you want.
Luke, I know as you go down, you'll really tell the story of it, but the unconditional transfers from other governments line does hide the story, because it includes unconditional transfers from anywhere. So right. It's not really other government largesse that's accounting for most of it, but Luke will get into that as we go.
For sure. Okay, so this is sort of where we really start getting into it. This first page here is based on last year's information, showing the current tax rates. One thing that we did this year, which you will notice is a difference over prior years, is I went through and I extracted the fire tax rate out of the general rate to try to really break it down to show council what's really impacting the tax rates and what the factors are. So in this budget document, we have the general tax rate plus the fire tax rate will give you the current actual tax levy that's on the tax bill. So that will look a little bit different here this year. And then here basically is just a little exercise that I went through just to get the budget to balance as is right now. This is definitely still, in draft form, pending a lot of conversation and discussion with council. So right now doesn't mean too much, just a little bit of handiwork to get everything to balance at the moment. This here is a little chart that I do up trying to extract, say, events or something that happened through the year, so we can try to really nail down on what's the organic growth in the assessments of the town versus growth or decrease in assessments due to outlying events. So as you can see, most of the change in assessment was due to actual physical events such as new construction, new lots, renovations, whatever. Very little assessment growth happened in the actual, organic assessment base for the town over the past year.
And that falling commercial assessment that you noted there seems to be quite common around the province, and I expect with the events of last year, we're going to see a more significant effect of that in the following year.
Right. Yeah, and then here we're just looking at the impact of the rates that I had above, which are still all contingent on the upcoming budget discussions. So right now, this doesn't mean overly, much of anything, but going forward, we'll really start to hone in on this sheet as we sort of get closer to the final budget to see what the true impact of the changes that we decide on are going to be.
Luke, how would you want to handle questions that members of council may have? Would you take them as we go along?
Yeah, for sure.
Can
Probably the
you
easiest way to do it.
Can you see all of us on your screen?
I can't. Let me see if I can adjust my screen.
If anyone on council has a question, I've got all of us on the screen, all 9 of us. Raise a hand and we'll go with that way if that's all right.
Sounds good. Just shout at me if anybody has a question.
Raise your hand before you shout.
Okay, so here at the bottom of the current page, once again, all still draft, very preliminary, but we tried to break out what the tax increase would be based on last year's deferred tax increase to the fire tax, and then this current year operating budget increase. I'm sure we'll get to that discussion a lot further, a lot more further on in the process. And
Luke,
that's just
when we say the deferred tax rate from last year, but it was determined by council last year, as for anybody viewing, as a result of COVID, the council had determined that tax rate would be deferred. So we didn't move ahead with the recommended rate increase last year, but still have that growth in expenses.
Right. And then this one here is just a quick little overview of what a 1 penny increase to the tax rate gives us and what 1% increase would give the town, just as a little bit of information. Okay, on the screen here now on your monitors, this is the comparison that we do every year between Bridgewater, Lunenburg, and Mahone Bay to show cost of living. This is based on an average assessment of $260,000, 10,000 kilowatt hours of electricity per year, and 50,000 gallons of water per year. Mahone Bay just sort of stays here in the middle of the pack as far as the residential goes. And so far, we're running on the bottom end of the commercial cost when compared to the other 2 units.
Luke, we have a question from Councillor Wilson.
Sure.
More of a comment, Your Worship, and I've made this comment before. This chart is extraordinarily misleading, and I really wish we'd stop using it. It assumes that housing in Bridgewater, Lunenburg, and Mahone Bay is all of equal value at a dollar cost, and that is not even close to true. And if you go and look at what equivalent housing is, roughly our assessment in Mahone Bay is double what it would be in Bridgewater. So if you're comparing apples to apples, then you need to take that into account. And if you don't want to take that into account, we shouldn't use this chart.
Okay, we'll definitely make a note of that to see if we can try to make this a bit more comparative, I guess, going forward.
Well, yeah, look, I think you could just note median assessed value of the housing for each. I mean, that's what we're using from a home bay.
Yeah.
So that's we got the 260,000 number that
Yeah.
we're using.
Okay, so here we're really going to start getting to the meat of things. This is where we start our revenue section of the budget. Once again, the budget revenue section stayed relatively stable over prior year's budget, other than a few items, which I'll just sort of dive into here in a minute. The first big change, if you compare the residential assessment, commercial assessment, like property tax revenue, to last year's budget, you're going to see a big difference because we extracted the fire tax rate equivalent out of these numbers retroactively, just to give us a apples to apples comparison for this, and then you'll see the balance of the tax revenue when we go over the fire services budget. Infrastructure charges, they're growing very slightly this year. Just a few additional units added during the course of the year. As of now, the infrastructure charge is staying at $295, but once again, that's open for discussion through the budget process, so that could change. De-transfer tax, fiscal 2020-21, we had a huge windfall of cash for de-transfer. There was a huge amount of properties that sold during the year in COVID. We undershot the budget on that line last year, just as we were preparing it at the outset of COVID, not really sure what impact it was going to have, but surprisingly, the housing market was extremely hot, especially here in Nova Scotia. It still is. So that's why we had a huge over budget there in last year. This year coming forward, I'm got a preliminary budget of 120,000 in there. I don't want to take that too high this year, just because we have had a really hot last year or two. So the housing stock that's going up for sale, I can't see it being another $200,000 year. But once again, that's all just guesswork at this point in time, based on historical values and stuff. Nothing really worth mentioning here. All these are just sort of standard revenue categories that stand year over year. On this page here, you'll see licenses and permits. We had budgeted $10,000 and ended up with $61,000. This is primarily due to a $45,000 permit that was issued for the nursing home that was not accounted for in the budget. So that makes up the bulk of that increase. So this coming year, we're just putting it back down to a more general average number going forward. Utility contribution to the town overhead, that's going up marginally just with budgeted costs. It's all a formula based in there. Return on investments, just a standard amount. Interest rates are considerably lower than they were in 1920. So we're not getting near as much interest as we did in prior years, unfortunately. And interest on taxes, we're putting that back up to the usual $20,000 to $23,000 range, just because we'll be charging interest on past due accounts for the full year, assuming that's what's passed in the budget. One thing I will mention on this page, the dividend from area. This includes how much is it? A $200,000 construction dividend for the solar garden project. So that's why it's so much higher over prior years. And what we've agreed upon, or what's preliminary in the solar garden project, is as the solar garden projects get completed, this is only a portion of the dividend that the town will receive. As the other solar garden projects get completed, then we'll get a prorated share of that dividend as well. So that'll be coming in over the next probably 2 years, I think, is what the timeline is. So this year plus 2 other fiscal years before all the solar gardens are up and operational and the dividends are distributed. And here, the gas tax rebate, we're looking at $165,000 this year, which is double what the usual amount is. But based on communications we've received so far, we do expect to get another double gas tax grant in this coming fiscal year. Okay, before we jump into the general government, are there any questions or comments on the revenue section of the budget? Okay, we'll plug along. So really in this section, we're going to see some deviations from budget 2021 to actual 2021 numbers. We had significant savings during the year in several cost categories due to COVID and no actual meetings taking place, no travel. So we saved a considerable amount of money, just everybody sort of staying where they were, doing online meetings and stuff. So that was definitely a positive for the year. Going forward, I did bump those back up to more actual numbers because just assuming that things might get back to normal here in the next little bit, hopefully, or a sense of normalcy at least. Here, salary staff or salaries for admin were going up significantly here. Most of this is due to the 75% cost share of the climate energy program manager position that council has approved for a 2-year term. So we've got 75% going here to general admin, and we've got the other 25% going to the electric utility. So that's why we see the bump up here under admin expenses. Other than that, there's not too much action going here. One thing I will note here, office expenses and communications for admin was at 7,600. We're going down to 3,200. This did include an allocation of the Sky Sale contract last year, which we will not have this coming fiscal year. So that's why that decreased by quite a bit. On this page, we'll see the audit fee has decreased substantially as a result of the audit RFP, which is great news. I really think we've got a good value for the audit, and we're already well ahead of schedule for audit prep and stuff, so that's great. There was a budget increase for Mjspit IT services. That was just a flow through from the MJSB budget. And this $8,700 for finance, software, and hardware. This is the new proposed line. It includes a $7,200 one-time fee to set up a PO, a purchase order module for finance. This will allow us to do purchase orders online. It will allow field staff to create purchase orders on mobile devices right on scene, submit them, the approvers get them directly, and then all that information gets fed right back into our financial reporting system. So even if we're not invoiced for something right away, then we're going to see that that's committed to in the financial reporting. So it's going to give us a lot more visibility and insight if that line item is approved. It then comes along with like a $1,500 or $1,200 continuing annual fee to keep that service fee up and running. But I really think it will be quite beneficial for staff and for reporting purposes. Tax rebates. This program we bumped up last year due to COVID. The uptake was marginally more than usual, but nothing significant like we had expected in the budget process. So I determined to use around 12,500 for this year's budget, just as a benchmark, and see it falls in line with the normal expectations of what we'd see coming in for that. On this page here, grant to fire department, donations received. In the past, when the town had received donations for the fire department, we received them, we issued the tax receipt, and then we issued those funds back to the fire department. It did come to light that this was not permissible by CRA guidelines. So we will not be distributing those donations back to the department directly. Those funds will go into the fire department equipment reserve in the custody of the town. And then as we need to draw upon those funds will be available for fire department specific activities and expenses. And I will point out here, Councillor Carver had sent out an email, I didn't get a chance to respond yet, about including capital and operating projects in the different sections of the budget. So here we've got capital projects. So this sort of pulls out the various capital projects that are budgeted in the capital budget. And it puts them as a place marker here under the different categories in which they relate to. So that's the capital side for general gov or general government. I currently don't have any of the operating activities broken out by department, but that can definitely be a line that I can add going forward, just as a for your information line, just to see how much of the operating expenses in a certain department are made up of one-time operating initiatives. So that I can definitely do if that's desirable by council. And before we move on, are there any questions on this section of the budget?
Deputy Mayor Kangata.
It's not about the budget per se, but I was just curious in terms of POs that you do per year, would you have a number in mind?
Not off the top of my head. It's definitely a number I could get for Thursday's meeting. I would say roughly, I'd say maybe 500, 600 POs a year, maybe. And I mean, there's a lot of, back and forth, especially with the fire department and trying to get that information back to finance in a timely manner before the invoices come in and stuff. So, but I'd say generally 500, but I can definitely confirm that number for Thursday's meeting for sure.
Appreciate it.
Okay, I'll move right along. I didn't skip anything, did I? No, okay, good. Next section of the protective services budget. Really, there's nothing here to discuss. The RCMP is just a budget we're delivered. We don't yet have that figure, so I just grossed it up based on prior year increases. That number becomes more readily available, I think, around June typically. So right now, that's still a best guess estimate. Bylaw enforcement, we're looking at doing a bit more bylaw enforcement going forward on the fiscal year. So we bumped that budget up marginally going forward. And other protection services, we've got REMO, fire inspection, everything's really staying the same all through here. Nothing's really increasing, anything worth mentioning, I don't think. Are there any questions on this section?
Councillor Carver's right.
Yes, I was just curious about how we actually pay the bylaw officer. Is it sort of because of the variable amounts? I mean, do we pay him by the hour? Is that how, or is there a specific?
Yeah, we would pay Al by the hour. It would all just go through the payroll. So based on how much time he's spent doing the tasks for the town, then would pay him accordingly.
And so is there a minimum or maximum on that?
I wouldn't say there's a minimum or maximum. I would just say that, I mean, I guess with a higher budget would have more of a buffer to allow for more projects and stuff that he could undertake. And then basically the maximum would be the budgeted amount. So we'd have to work in the confines of the budget as to how many hours we could have the bylaw enforcement officer working for the town through the year. But there'd be no set minimum for that.
And I'll just add to that there, when we hired Al, we did have a stipulated level of effort that we expect, and it goes up and down based on the amount of enforcement. But throughout the year, the amount of work that Maureen, kind of ensures that it is worked out to what he was anticipating under the contract. Al's not interested in being a full-time employee, but he's happy to help out when we need him, and maybe a little bit more than he originally anticipated. So, yeah.
Great, thank you.
Deputy Mayor Kangata and then Councillor Feeney.
Yeah, on the policing budget piece, I was wondering if there's anywhere or there's something you can share that has a breakdown of what that amount entails, what it provides to us.
Dylan might be able to shed some more light on this, but my understanding is it's just basically us paying a share of the provincial RCMP costs to have the RCMP presence in town. I'm not sure if there's an actual backup document. Dylan, do you have any more information on
Yeah,
that?
the provincial
There is.
RCMP costs don't really break down in a very transparent way. I'm sure that the province can allocate for their whole budget, but what they end up doing is all of the provincial policing services contracts that municipalities have, with the exception of I think 5 municipalities that still contract directly from the federal government, all the rest contract through the provincial government for the RCMP. So really the province holds the contract with the RCMP, and the province takes all their costs under that contract and they pool them and they allocate them on the basis of their contracts with us. So we kind of just get that percentage, that number. And in our case, I believe it's relative to, the number of officers is set, and the cost per officer is going to be whatever the provincial total cost, including vehicles, buildings, everything the province pays for. We don't get the breakdown.
Okay, Councillor Feeney?
Just on that point, it's just, the other item is, I think 30%, the federal government picks up 30% of the overall RCMP costs. That's why they all go to Ontario when the Queen arrives. So we pay our piece of the 70%. But I was asking Luke about the discussion we had at our last meeting around the accessibility officer and our financial contribution to support that person. Is that new in money, that new overlay in this section or somewhere else?
I had originally headed in this section. I saw my notes. I still headed my notes, but it's actually been pushed forward to another section further on the budget.
Okay,
so I'll
fair
bring
enough.
that up when we get there.
I saw it in the notes and I just wanted that. Thank you. That's good.
Okay, no further questions. We'll move
Okay.
along. So we've already covered that. So next section is transportation services. There's not too much difference here, budget over budget. Transportation, a lot of this maintenance costs are difficult to budget because, you budget for worst case scenario, you hope for best case scenario. So far, I've been doing pretty good with that.
I guess one thing to note there that connects into the capital budget, but it's always interesting, is you can see the repairs on the 5-ton truck are getting up there. And that does appear, I think, is projected for next year in the budget right now. But we always have those kind of things on the horizon as the repairs start to get up there. So it seems to have climbed a little bit year over year. So I just wanted to comment on that.
Yep, for sure. Good thing to point out, Dylan. One thing I will mention going through here is the insurance costs have gone up significantly over the prior year. So throughout the budget document, you will see that all insurance categories have gone up significantly, and that's across the board. I touched base with a few local municipal colleagues and whatnot, and they all were seeing increases of insurance across the board. Once again, just pretty much static expenses. Here, asset management initiatives. We had the initiative last year. We've got another one in the budget for this coming year. So, really not a lot of action, but there is some, initiatives there to keep us on our asset management pathway forward, which we've got a really good understanding of now, and looking forward to continued discussions on that initiative. Salt for this year was significantly under budget. We had a very mild, easy winter, so that was, wonderful. We lowered the budget this coming year by $2,000. It's once again, it's one of those numbers that it's a hard thing to budget. You don't want to budget too low and then have a snowmageddon year like we did back in 2014, but you don't want to overcharge and put too much burden on the tax rate unnecessarily. So right now, we've got the 38,000. Street lighting is the same. Engineering services, legal, this has gone up by $10,000. What is that for That's for the Edgewater Main Intersection Operating Initiative is included in that for $8,000. So that'll be detailed in the operating initiative section of the budget further on the document.
Councillor Burdick has a question.
Sure.
Yes, thanks. There was a line about sand and gravel up there. Is that because of the nursing home project, or the budget is, where are we? I was just comparing the actual to the budget for the past couple of years to the budget here.
I'm thinking what happened there is with the milder winter, they must have used more sand or something over the, because I believe that's for, like the sand expense would be for roadways.
Yeah, I think, yeah, most of this stuff's going to be, you know, heavy rain washouts on shoulders and erosion, mostly shoulder repairs, I think, most of this gravel. So it's one of those ones that's pretty variable on the type of year we get weather-wise, I would say. I think Luke's point about snow holds here. We have to budget it and then hope we don't need it rather than not budget it and then turn out to need it.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. So here, just once again, pointing out the capital projects in the transportation category, just denoted here at the bottom of the page. Environmental health services.
And I guess we should note for new counselors and members of the public, since this one's always an awkward title, it starts the awkward title sections. These sections are prescribed by the province. So environmental health services, for example, you know, we tend to refer to as sewage collection or wastewater collection, but the grandiose titles, or perhaps misnomers in some cases, those are prescribed by the province. So that's where those section headings do come from.
So once again, there's not a lot of movement in this budget. One thing I will point out is under engineering consultants, we had budgeted 12,400. That was mostly for a wastewater utility or wastewater rate study, which didn't get completed this year. We're not forecasting that to happen next year, so that's been just removed from the budget altogether.
Sorry, Luke, I just have one question on that page.
Sure.
So the reserve on for the pump replacements, which was a new line item last fiscal year, that, as I understand from your notes, so last year we were intending to raise those $10,000 through our operating resources, i.e. property tax. But now we're going to continue the $10,000 going forward. It's just that we're going to fund that out of the capital funding.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, I initially had it put in here under operating, but then the discussion was had between me and the CAO about how it wasn't really an operating expense. So we're just going to take it to the capital dedicated revenue stream.
Did we reverse that method? Did we reverse that convention this year or the year that just ended as well?
So the year just ended. It still did come out of the operating.
Operating. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks. Perfect.
But other than those two items, that budget is pretty, once again, not a lot of movement in the numbers. Everything's still pretty static through here. Mjspit costs relatively static. And once again, capital projects. This number is quite large and alarming, but that's mostly due to large wastewater sewer line infrastructure projects included in the capital budget. That's dependent on external funding. Before we move on, are there any other questions on that section? Okay, moving right along. Public health and welfare. Once again, Cemeteries are budgeted here. The detailed cemetery budget is included later in the budget document, so we can see what makes up this amount further on the package. The regional housing deficit, once again, this is the number that's just basically told to us every year, and we end up paying it for the upkeep of housing project or housing. And
yeah, specifically, Luke, for, again, for anybody watching or new members of council, so that's our designated share of the upkeep costs for any Western regional housing in provincial
Right.
housing units in Mahone Bay. So every community pays a very different amount based on the specific housing that exists in their community. And I know we call it deficit here, but it really is a set percentage of their costs. It does go up when they do more capital work. So they do tend to let us know, as they have in recent years, that we may see higher bills because they have had some capital work going on. But I don't think Mahone Bay's had as much as many places have in recent years, so that they're kind of doing an overhaul. So just wanted to kind of note what that really is, and what that, we know the units in town that goes to contribute to.
good point, thank you. And
Deputy
just the
Mayor?
one- Oh, sorry.
And then Councillor Wilson.
Thank you. With the payment of that, or remittance of that deficit, as you call it, does it give us any ability to be able to, if those units are being left derelict by the province, to be able to ask that they maintain them, or will we be, is that seeking undue attention when that kind of thing happens?
I think we absolutely have a role to play in commenting on that kind of thing. If there's work that needs to be done, I'm sure they'd also be happy to tell us where that fits in their overall capital plan. And the council has resolved to meet with the Department of Housing, and Western Regional Housing is separate from that, but checking in with them would certainly be a reasonable thing to do, get that information. But the terms of be careful what we wish for. As I said, we do pay a share of it. So if we do agitate them to do some work, we'll also pay a share. But there's nothing wrong with that. We just need to know going in.
Councillor Wilson, and then Councillor Feeney.
Thanks, I'm sorry. The $30,000 in housing initiatives, is that the item that I see further down the track about an affordable housing study or something like that?
Yes, that will be included in the operating initiative section of the budget. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Councillor Feeney.
You point out I have the benefit of looking out my bedroom window every night at the Cherry Lane facilities. We don't have the retro, the reverse, the rear view mirror view of this, but I think like the province spent a good hunk of $1 million on Cherry Lane in 2017 through 2018. So, and that was reflected in our budget. It's just that we've passed the big CapEx and now we're just funding OpEx, I think. I seem to recall our piece of the action was in the $65,000 range not that long ago.
There.
So
Go up, please.
Yeah, so I think the upgrades have certainly been substantial there.
Okay, very good.
The more the merrier, Luke.
Yeah, you've got some help.
We need all the help we can get tonight.
Honestly. Any more questions on that section of the budget?
Good to go.
Okay, here we go. Okay, next section, environmental development. Claire, no. Go. Sorry about that. Okay, so first thing that'll draw the attention to is legal services advertising. This is for the MPS LUB study. There's still approximately $31,000 of expense to be incurred this coming fiscal year, which is included in this line. It is being funded currently through operating reserve transfer. Once again, accessibility initiatives. This is a special initiative project that is being funded through the capital or operating reserve transfer.
Well, quick comment on that, Luke, because it's two things. It's a $25,000 special initiative that was included in last year's budget and brought forward, but it's also an ongoing cost, and this is, I believe, was referenced earlier with the question, right? This includes the ongoing cost for our share of the accessibility coordinator per the agreement that council approved recently. So I think somebody had asked where that shows up. So that shows up here, but it's combined in this line with the one-time initiative. So it's not 31,600 per year, 6,600 per year. The 25,000 is a one-time doing our share of operationalizing the Lunenburg County plan, which we'll talk about more under operating initiatives.
Good catch. I missed that in my notes. Thank you, Dylan. Going forward, community beautification. There was the operating project that was done in fiscal 2020-21. This is not going to be happening in 21-22, so that's been removed from the budget. And once again, just some capital projects put there. And that's the end of that section. Are there any other questions or comments? Okay. Recreation and cultural. Centennial project. We had some last minute centennial costs roll through throughout the year. We did still have some centennial merchandise that we're hoping to sell during the year, but due to COVID, that sort of put the kibosh to that plan. That inventory is still on hand, so we do hopefully plan to still see some revenue trickle in from that remaining inventory over the next year or so. So hopefully that 58 deficit over the budget will sort of work its way out over the next year or so as we get some of those items sold off.
And just to note, we're mostly referring to the books, which we still have a good stockpile of, and excellent books, which do continue to sell, but obviously we've a lot less retail activity than we've had previously, but they're still a great local resource. So, you know, I don't think they've lost a lot of value over the past year.
Active transportation. This was an operating initiative in.
One second, Luke, we got a question with Deputy Mayor.
I had thought Luke was moving on. I was just curious about that active transportation piece and wondering, because it reads 0. I think there was some work that we're thinking about the Blue Route, I guess, kind of work that has been mooted in the past, and I don't know where that lands. So I was curious about why it's 0 for now, or maybe it lands somewhere else.
Yeah, I guess I can speak to that one. So essentially, we're moving from active transportation as a sort of planning or studying activity. So there is some consultation that Wood Council has planned for this summer, but what we're now seeing is active transportation ending up in capital, and there's a series of transportation projects under capital that are referenced in council's strategic plan and then referenced again here in the long-term budget section. But because we're still engaging in planning activities, you know, we're not necessarily expecting to get to do, we're of course, we're doing all the infrastructure projects the council approved last year in terms of transportation, but we're not necessarily expecting to get to a next one this year. So that's why it's not there.
Okay.
Any further questions before I move on?
No.
Okay, moving on. Oh, and then once again, this section, once again, very little movement in that middle end of that section. And the capital projects. This here is fiscal services education transfer. Once again, this is just the transfer set by the province for the town. We've got our debt payments on our long-term debt. We did pay off some debt in the current fiscal 2020-21. So that's why we see our principal payments going down in 21-22. As it'll be another year before we see any sort of principal payments coming online for the fire station project or anything, by the time that gets rolled over to the long-term debenture. So this page here, we're just looking at the preliminary transfer balances. Once again, this is all open for discussion as we go through the budget process. so nothing too much to be concerned about. This operating reserve transfer, this is the amount as detailed on the note sheet that you have in your package. Most of that is for the operating initiative reserves and some to offset a couple other expenses throughout the operating budget.
Luke, I just wanted to note that I know it will come up underwater, but it might not be as much of a story there, that this was the last year was our last year, paying anything from tax rate through general into the water utilities operating. So just wanted to acknowledge that was a gradual phase out, but as of this year, thanks to some difficult water rate increases, we understand that, is borne by the end customer. But it is important to make the water utility self-sufficient. So good to see that anyway.
For sure.
Councillor Wilson, you had a question? You're on mute, Councillor Wilson.
I hit it, but I didn't hit it hard enough. We transfer a lot of money into these funds, particularly the operating fund. And then throughout the document, there are little bits and pieces where we transfer it back out again. And I'm just wondering why we bothered to do that.
I guess, Luke, the best example is looking at last year, just as an example. So generally what we do is we budget it, everything that is going to be a one-time expense significantly outside of our normal tax revenue streams to come from operating for stability in the year. But if it turns out that we come in under budget on other items throughout that year, we don't need to resort to the reserve. We're able to fund it. And so last year, as an example, we were in a position to, and Luke can tell the story a little bit more, to not have to go to the reserve. But if we otherwise had, everything else come in as budgeted, and there were a few special items, if we had not planned to pay for them from the reserve, we'd be in a position of altering the tax rate to pay for those expenses that are intended to be one time. And generally, I guess we've been fortunate, and we have prudent budgeting. So last year was a good example where we did not have to go against the reserve. Luke, I don't know if you want to point out the lines there.
Oh yeah, sure. Right here, the operating reserve, we had budgeted we were going to be taking 211,000 out of the operating reserve last year, but we ended up taking nothing out. That was mostly due to a number of savings throughout the budget or throughout the actual results last year. So we were able to keep that money in the operating reserve. So that just sort of keeps there and keeps building. The MFC best practice to have 6 months of operating funds in that reserve. So we're getting there as a town. We're still quite a ways off, but we're a lot better than we were, say, 2 or 3 years ago.
Councillor Feeney.
Just a point of clarification. So, I think that's a fair comment, and as well, I think it's fair to say that the decision the council made last year, which was to actually take $150,000 out of the capital reserve and use it to augment the operating budgets, because of that direction from the province to beef up the operating reserve. I assume since we ran such a strong operating surplus, we didn't need to do that as well. So you don't. Correct. I think Luke, that the operating surplus is more than just the 211. It's the 211 plus the 150 on the other side as well. So I mean, there was a lot of good news all in all in 2020. So you do, and I'm not sure if it's here or not on this page or the next page. I think the budget is based on moving that one-time transfer that we didn't do last year, that we deliberated and litigated to death last year during this process. So I think everybody's heard my rant on that subject many times. So I won't belabor the point tonight. But the budget plan is to do that this year, though, on a one-time basis.
That is currently in the draft budget, yes.
Okay, and the premise of that, just so we're all on the same page, is that the operating budget, the operating reserves have been deemed by the province to be too low, and that was denoted in the municipal report that came out 5-6 months ago. Okay, cool.
Yeah, it's our annual financial condition indicators
Yeah.
report for anybody who's not familiar.
I-
And Joe, just one piece of clarity. I know this is always a point you and I come back to, but it's not coming out of capital reserve and into operating reserve. It's money that would have gone into
Yeah.
capital reserve in that year that was going
Yes.
into operating instead. Yeah, we didn't actually take anything out of our
No.
capital reserve.
No, I'm totally with you. I do
Clear.
think it would be amazing. Could you imagine if all of the municipalities in this province had to have an operating reserve at that
One.
best practices number? It
Well,
would
I think
be
the challenge for us is that
never
the
gonna happen.
rurals have an
Oh, yeah.
imbalance, so many of them are able to, and then the towns are expected to have that same level of operating reserve, and it's just not as realistic. But good to have a buffer, because years like COVID, for many transit operators, fortunately we're not one, really had to dip into those operating reserves, so they can be very necessary. And we have some things that have come up in the last number of years, councillors know, that haven't been anticipated.
Thank you. Any other questions? Back to you, sir.
Okay, moving right along. Next section is the extracted fire protection services budget. So as you'll see here in the top 3 lines, this is the fire specific tax revenue that I've extracted from the town general tax revenue we discussed earlier. So this is basically 50% of the variable fire expense of the year, plus the hydrant fees. And then the other 50% of the revenue down here, the 157, would be the other 50% of the operating expenses minus, not including the hydrant fees for the outside areas, as they're not serviced by the hydrants. So that's the variance between those two numbers. And then we've got the donations coming in, estimated at around 15,000 this year, expecting a higher amount of donations coming in with the new fire station project. Those donations would just be transferred right to the fire department reserve for future expense requirements.
Councillor Feeney?
Luke, just on the protective services in the outside areas, is the assumption to use the same 13.5 cents? Or are we going with the 11?
Right now, they are set at the 11 cents.
At the 11.
Yeah, it's just a sort of a
Fair
background
enough.
calculation just to try to make it even on all sides and stuff.
Okay. But I guess the point is, is that the fire protection rate within the town under this proposed budget is going to be higher than the fire proposed rate in Indian Point, Oakland, Mahone, and Mater's Cove, and Clearland. Just that's our assumption right now.
Yep, that's correct. And most of that is due to the hydrant fees, which are borne solely by the town.
I gotcha. Oh, so you're saying that the hydrant fees are a subset of the 13.5.
Correct. Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Gotcha.
And this is really just, because the town has not expressed a fire charge separately from tax rate before, we've always been paying it. Residents it's not a new charge, but Luke is showing here more transparency, or more transparently, what the cost of the fire service is.
This is a fabulous improvement, Luke. I mean, really, the detail down to this level is a huge improvement. You should be really pleased with how that all rolled out.
Thank you. It's definitely been something I've been, striving toward, and I'm glad to see it come together this year. So we keep improving this package year over year, and making it longer and longer.
Councillor Nell. You're on now, Councillor.
There we
Thank
are. Just one quick question. So we've broken it out here on the budget. When the tax bills come out, is it going to be broken out in them as well? Or is it going to just show the one rate?
That is a discussion I'm hoping to have with council during the budget deliberations. And ideally, I would like to see the tax rate and then the fire tax levy rate separate on the bills.
Okay. On we go.
Okay. So here under administration salary or administration expense, we do have a new line here $5,000 is a line that I stuck in here on the budget for allocation of staff salaries, as there's been a lot of discussion of coordination with town staff, with the new project, administration of the fire services. So just trying to allocate some staff time sort of to the department, as we do with the other various departments of the town.
Yeah, I think, Luke, it's best to describe the role that finance plays with respect to all departments. And you earlier referenced your purchase order module. And I know one of the departments looking forward to that purchase order module, I think, and any purchase order system is the fire departments, that they do take advantage of that system and work with finance regularly to get their equipment and pay their expenses.
Absolutely. Streamlines it for everybody. Honorarium we've got going up a little bit this year, basically staying stable. Adding a couple more items on there as noted in the fire protection notes. Training, there wasn't much done.
We can
sorry.
note that honoraria increase, as we're describing it there, subject to possible change. It's essentially services that could be performed by members of the department, or could be performed otherwise, potentially under contract. The department with the current building performs a number of services, including maintenance. They're also looking after the equipment in ways. There are certain services that we continue to expect that we will have a need of, and some maybe more of with the new building. And so we're trying to make sure that we're conscious of them here. There will be likely a need for compensation for taking care of that building. So, however that is worked out, we have put it here under the honoraria heading, because that's the heading for what we pay the department members. But I guess I just wanted to note that it could be done in a different way. We're not actually saying for sure that we've worked out how that will be done.
Okay, Councillor Now.
Yeah, my question was regarding the honoraria, because in the notes, it said for an increase in the honorarium to the chief or to, didn't say custodian, but a superintendent, I think it said. So we're looking at doing that. I was sort of wondering, where are we looking at paying the chief an extra honorarium, or that's
We
not?
have been looking at what Lunenburg does with regards to this. We just talked about the purchase order system and the fire department's kind of role in purchasing. And right now that, as you know, Richard, has fallen to the chief to coordinate. And Lunenburg and other units have an understanding that the chief, in performing some of those roles, does get a different honoraria from the rest of the members. So it is something that Luke and I have been talking about as a possibility to essentially to be able to say there is a expectation that the chief will have a certain authority on behalf of the town with respect to the purchasing system linked into the finance department, and that the chief will exercise that, and that perhaps there's an honoraria that would be relatively relative to that role.
We haven't set an amount or anything like that then.
No, like I said, we've looked at what some other towns, including Lunenburg, have done.
Yep.
Okay. No
Moving
questions? We're good.
Okay. So training for last year really didn't amount to anything, just nobody really went and did much of anything. We're hoping to get some more training done, some level 1 books purchased or something this coming year. So that'll eat up some of the training budget.
Sure, everybody will be very excited to get back to training when they can safely do so.
Absolutely. Electricity, I did increase a bit this year just for the new expectation, the new fire hall coming online sometime here this fall. So not really sure what exactly that's going to result in, but I did increase the budget there as a buffer to account for the increased energy consumption with the new station.
And last year's may have been down a bit because of decreased usage in the previous station compared to prior years.
Councillor Now.
Yeah, just looking back over the thing with the honorarium, with the new building, and I think it was made mention of that we do a lot of the cleaning and stuff like that now in the auditorium, which won't happen in the new building. So are we looking at janitorial services, custodial services there? Will that come out of honorarium, or is it going to go under a separate heading?
Yeah, right now it's all, I think it's all under that heading, right, Luke? So certainly we could separate those out, as they're referenced in the notes. But we don't know yet whether it will be something that is done by the department versus contracted out or by staff otherwise. Just something that hasn't been worked out yet.
Right, as it stands right now, we had accounted for, in the budget as it stands, something that would be done internally by members as it has been done traditionally. In this current year, as the station is constructed, see what the needs are, see what we're looking at, and then that would likely turn into some sort of a custodial type expense or position in the fiscal 2022-23 budget. So just trying to, gauge and to see what the needs are of the department once the new station is constructed. Everybody sees, try to get a gauge for what we're looking at going forward.
And we would be intending, like, we've got this sort of superintendent description as well, and like we would be looking at bringing something, in terms of a position description for that before council, before we would go anywhere or something like that.
Right.
Councillor Feeney.
So I think we're all on the same page that line item includes potential operating costs for the new facility as well as the honorarium. We just might want to just change some of the description in line 6 as this document is public.
We could even split that line,
yeah.
Luke, just keep the previous honorarium where it was and add a new line and just keep them separate.
That's probably a good edit.
I've made a note of that.
And then maybe it'll be consolidated in future years, or maybe they'll move further away, but we'll see what happens.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll move along then.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I will mention, uniforms did increase in budget this year. In discussions with the chief, we're looking at, there's quite a few members who don't have the appropriate dress uniforms. So we're looking at getting them properly outfitted in this coming year, and that is something that they are going to be doing this year. So we expect that $6,000 will mostly, if not all, be used this year to get that job complete. Insurance just increased, as mentioned previously. Fire department debt charges. So we're looking at around $44,000, give or take, of interest charges on the current short-term loan for the fire station project. So that's something new this year that we'll be looking at. And then
Councillor now.
Yes,
Sorry.
can you clarify the insurance that was mentioned there? Is that on the equipment or is that on the firefighters?
this insurance here is for the equipment.
Okay.
And then there's some insurance up higher here, right here, and this would be for the building. And I think there's some more. It's split up all over the place. And then there's insurance for firefighters up here. Yeah.
Okay. So that insurance for firefighters, would that be the workers' comp, or is it a combination of workers' comp and our private one?
Both. It's a combination.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep. So then down here, we've got the non-operating expenses of the department. We've got our $180,000 for the hydrant supply. We've got a transfer to reserve. The reason it's so high in the actuals for 2020-21 is there was a significant fire department surplus for the year. So if that surplus will essentially be taken and put into reserve for future use for, the purchase of a new truck, help with the fire station loan. So that's why that's increased so much. And before I move on, are there any other questions on the fire services budget?
Councillor Carver.
This is probably a really basic question, but that water supply and hydrants, what are we actually paying for there?
Well,
are we paying ourselves for the water?
Yes, that's going to the water utility as revenue.
Okay, so thank you.
Not a problem. Any other questions?
Don't seem to be.
Okay. We'll move along to the water utility, and I will just point out here public fire protection. So this is, most of this here is your hydrant fee that we were just discussing, the 183,000. We've got our revenue lines based on the water study and the new rates coming online as of April 1st. Everything else there is pretty much static year over year. Nothing much exciting moving. You'll see here the appropriations from other funds. Last year we had a $15,000 transfer. The year before we had 25,000. This year with the new rates fully in effect, we're now down to a $0 transfer from Town General. So the water utility is self-sufficient at this point, which is good news. And this other line down here, this was a revenue line from Hurricane Dorian, a claim that was put in. It has not physically been received yet, but I do have the documentation, so the accrual was just booked to make sure the revenue was captured in the correct year. So that's what we're expecting to have on hand for that claim.
If Juan was any indication, we'll get it 7 years from now.
It'll come at some point. So here we're into the expense section of the water utility. Once again, very static, not a lot of movement in expenses. Chemicals came in a little under budget for the last year, so we have adjusted the budget downward to try to make a more accurate reflection of the expected chemical costs for the year. Same thing as water testing fees. There are some operating improvements to structures that were noted that would like to be done this year, so that's why the expense line for this is increased marginally. Once again, everything's very static down through here, nothing really to draw any attention to. Same thing. Yeah, not a lot of movement at all in any of these expenses. Once again, on this page, the audit fee has gone down significantly over prior years due to the new audit RFP, which is great news. Under special services, that is for a waterline diagnostic. It is under the operating initiative section of the budget. It's a total $60,000 project, and we're hoping to receive 30,000 of that through the PCAP. So we're looking at a town expense of around $30,000 for that project to identify the water leaks and problem areas in our water distribution system. And down non-operating expenses, we've just got our long-term debt payments continuing. The interfund loan, that's going to the cemetery. That is getting close to getting paid off finally. So that's good news for the perpetual care fund. And that's all for the water utility. Are there any questions on the water utility before I move on to the electric utility? Okay, something I will note before we move on is we are actually expecting some surplus numbers here for the utilities, so that's good news over prior years. Much welcome.
And surplus would be to be available to contribute to many of the capital works that we have planned, for one thing.
Absolutely. So moving along into the electric utility budget. We're keeping our budgeted revenues from electricity sales in line with the 2020-21 budget. I did discuss this with Aaron Long, and he's felt that that was a reasonable assumption to make based on last year's actuals. So we're just going to keep those held stable. There are no rate increases or anything to factor into that. Something else, other revenue here, we're looking, that also included some revenue from the Hurricane Dorian claim.
And Luke, obviously the big story on this one is revenue from Riverport. Right. And I'm sure we'll get into talking a little bit more about this, but as council members know, we have long-standing partnership agreements with Riverport, and we're looking at restructuring some of the way that we basically take on expenses. Traditionally, we've done a lot of billing each other back and forth, which on both sides has significantly increased our costs. And we've been looking at a kind of a new structure, which I know Luke has provided some detail on to you in the notes, and we'll be talking more about later on in our budget process. But very big change here. It is revenue with corresponding expense, so it's not a windfall. And I will note none of that is new expense. It's all just previously been incurred directly by Riverport rather than through Mahone Bay. So that's a proposal here, I guess I could say at this point, and would represent a big change in the numbers in the budget, wouldn't represent a significant change to the assets deployed in the field between Mahone Bay and Riverport in partnership.
And as Dylan mentioned, I did provide the detail breakdown in that amount in the budget notes, just for anybody who really wants to dive in to see the true ins and outs of that proposed relationship there. So for power purchase, there were some marginal items here. The good news story is, after some more further discussions and meetings with Aaron Long, it was discovered that there was a coding error that was happening here. So our power purchase from NSPI for the backup, top up, other various fees that NSPI charges, like the transmission fees, it was not as far over budget as what we were projecting as of the Q3 financial report to the audit committee. So that was great news once that was all figured out and put to rest. Going forward, though, we do see that increasing substantially this year. This is sort of a $85,000 contingency is included in there as it relates to the backup top-up tariff change that NSPI currently has in front of the regulator. I was advised by Aaron Long to have that in there, just as because at this point we're not sure what that end result will be. So we've got that in there just as a safety precaution, I'll say. And then the other area, wind power and imports. There's new power purchase prices for the wind power. Quantity of electricity is still remaining the same, and same as imports. We're just looking at having a marginal increase there, and possible some more electricity coming in through the import section. And the solar energy will be coming online next year. We were exploring having that coming online for the current fiscal year that we're budgeting for, but it was felt that until we get the solar garden up and fully operational, that will likely have that included in next year's budget.
Yep.
So,
Councillor Feeney.
So Luke, I'm sure there's going to be an opportunity to have a deep dive here. This is the first exposure to the new business model with Riverport. I mean, I don't think that's come to council or been shared with council to date, but how this works. I'm assuming that the salaries here includes the Riverport consolidation too.
Correct.
So I'm not sure what the business model is if the entire Riverport utility is going to get consolidated into the Mahone Bay water utility, but strikes me that there's a conversation that should be had with council just so we can get up to speed on the story. But
yeah, for sure.
When I look at that, I'm seeing flat budget to 2019's budget view, which sounds good to me, considering we knew that some of our volume was off with reinforced plastics, for example, closing down for 2 months and domestic impact. But wow, like that NSP number is a big number with an $85,000 contingency. Like that's a bit of a daunting number. And then so again, like there's not a lot of there as far as contribution to the town net of this new business model with Riverport. So I guess I'm going to have a lot of questions, and I just don't know what the process is on when we're going to have the conversation around this new business model with the utility and the economic impact of that coupled. I don't see that all coming together by Thursday. Do you?
Well, I'm happy to
Mayor, I
comment
guess
on
so.
that, Joe. So we will definitely have some more information on Thursday, and there's a closed session on the Thursday agenda. We get into the contract details as currently being discussed. But I expect we'll actually have a a specific session on this. We just felt it was appropriate here. Luke and I had a lot of discussion about, do we show this here or do we not show this here? We thought it was appropriate to show it here, understanding that it is essentially a net in and out, but we wanted to get that discussion going, and yeah, there will be an opportunity for me to provide some more context on Thursday, and from there for some more information to be put down and on paper to kind of describe the structure that we're talking about, which we have been working on describing on paper. Broadly speaking, this is in line with our existing agreements. But the way in which we'd be doing it, there is a proposal to really change that. And I think it will be in everyone's interest, but clearly not fully elucidated in a few numbers here on this page.
Yeah, fair enough. Like I have every confidence that the plan will evolve and be disseminated to council and in due course. I just, like when I look at $45,000 in operating surplus after we take on the management of Riverport, before we add in capital, it's not exactly crack open the champagne on the profitability of the utility, because it looks to me like it's just another year of negative cash flow. But I mean, we'll have lots of time to litigate that. I just we'll have to get into it over the next weeks and months, I guess.
Councillor Wilson?
Yeah, I second that comment. I have a really simple question about this whole utility thing, and that is, we are saving about $400,000 a year in power costs, purchase power cost of power, and it just seems to disappear without a trace. And I, as we were doing this deliberation, would like to know where that 400 grand went. And I'll tell you what might help, and it's just a suggestion, is if we could break all of this stuff down into cost per kilowatt hour, so we know what we're talking about in comparative terms, it might be very helpful, because I see money coming in from Riverport, 200 and whatever $1,000, and I see a whole bunch of dribs and drabs going out, but I have no way of telling, did we make money? Did we lose money? Or what's going on here? It's not clear at all.
Well, that, like I said, we'll work on providing some more supporting information through the budget process, and then we'll revisit the questions.
Okay, thank you. Back to you, Luke.
Okay. There's not really too much to mention other than like your salaries, your benefits and stuff, which have contracted services, which is all lumped into that Riverport number that we've been talking about recently. Vehicle expense, once again, that's one of those numbers, training, health and safety. Other expenses, that does include an operating initiative. Which one is that?
Quite the initiative.
So yeah, so in this $92,000 here, there's a $25,000 expense for this year alone for the Nova Scotia Power FAM adjustment, which is expected to come due this year after much deliberation back and forth. That is expected to come due this year, so that's included in there. And we're also looking for a $5,000 electric rate study, $12,000 for Grow the Load operating initiative, and a $50,000 electrical diagnostics, which is an operating initiative as well. So there's a lot of one-time, basically all of that $92,000 in there is like a one-year operating initiative expense, which will come out of sort of past year operating surplus electric utility funds. But the way it shows up is it's going to show up as a deficit, because whereas the town has a separate operating reserve fund, the utility doesn't. So when the financial statements are prepared, it shows as a deficit in the current year, and then the accumulated surplus will then decrease by that amount. So It's a discussion I'm going to have with the auditors this year to see if we can make that a bit more clear cut and make this work better, because right now it's not clear and it causes a lot of confusion and unnecessary worry, I think. Going forward, really everything else is staying stable. Other office salaries, this is 25% of the climate energy program manager position, plus the wages for the Riverport Electric office administrator. That can be discussed once again once we get into the real down low discussion on the electric utility.
And
Once
Luke would
again,
probably note here that we don't allocate staff time to capital here, but
right,
depending on the projects, that 25% time from the climate and energy position is likely to go specifically to the solar project if it's moving ahead, or a fair chunk of it is. So that will end up actually reflecting in a lower operating cost there than, but that's how we've got it set up, because we don't know that for sure that project is moving ahead.
right. Once again, you'll see the savings in the audit costs. Great news. Nothing else really worth mentioning. Depreciation staying pretty much in line. And then no capital to revenue as of yet. Pending further discussion. And before we move on, are there any other high-level comments or questions on the electric utility before we move on? Okay, so we'll move along. First page here, operating budget for Park Cemetery. Not too much to mention here. Once again, we've got a $4,500 transfer to Perpetual Care Fund, which is made up from the sale of lots and the investment income in the account. So we're just flipping that right over to Perpetual Care. And then if we run a surplus next year, then we can have the similar discussions that we had this year to transfer that surplus into Perpetual Care and get us that much closer to where we need to be. And here's the Bayview Cemetery budget. Very basic, not a lot of movement. Mowing costs are down based on the tender. We're now paying based on actual rather than just a budgeted amount every year. So that resulted in significant savings for 2020-21. So we could be that low again this year if it's sort of a dry, warm, hot summer and not a lot of mowing is required, but we dropped it down to 4,500 to try to get more in that, ideal range where we expect to come in. Are there any questions on the cemetery budgets before we move along? Okay, so here now we're on to the change of funds, status of town funds page. This is just a high level overview of various funds sort of amalgamated together for their various end goals, to sort of show where we are, where we're going in the projected budget. As you can see here, oh, go ahead.
Sorry, Luke. I mean, I'm just on the next page with your fund details. These pages make me so happy I could cry, to be honest with you, Luke. I mean, I couldn't be more thrilled with this level of detail. I mean, honestly, thank you very much for all the effort to do this. My question is around the delineation of the gas tax reserve. I'd never seen it illustrated that way, and I'm just curious: is there something about the gas tax revenue are there certain parameters around how it's used, and is that why you have to break it out into its own line item reserve?
Yes, that's correct. Based on the reporting requirements for the gas tax, it has to be kept in its own separate bank account, and that revenue has to go with the gas tax funds. So we have to keep that separated if we don't use it in the current year, which we haven't been doing. We just have to keep that segregated.
Are there any restrictions or criteria around how those gas tax funds are allocated or invested into capital?
There's certain projects, certain infrastructure projects, types of activities that they're eligible for, yes.
Okay, interesting. No, I didn't know
Yeah.
that. That's good to know.
It's pretty broad at this point, but it mostly comes with specific reporting requirements and signage requirements. So when you decide that you're tapping gas tax, as we did for the the little project of paving the turn loop up on the top of Main Street there, for example, you would have to do certain signage requirements, which are generally voided because of the small scale of our projects. So generally the reason here is just to make sure that when you're a municipality doing a big project that is prominent and you're using gas tax funds, that you do remember to give credit where credit was due and allocate the funds, that way. That's, as much as anything, that's why they're tracked, I would say.
Well, Mayor, I was just thinking, like, when I first joined you on council here, I think we had a $133,000 capital reserve, net of the overrun of the bridge on Kinburn Street. So it's a lot easier to put your mind at ease. We can afford these projects when we have the kind of planning that we've had over the last 4 years.
More to come, I'm sure. Councillor Wilson. You're on mute, Kelly.
We had an underspend, if you looked at the very early part of revenue versus expenses, of about $650,000. And if I am understanding this correctly, which I can't see it now, but we have about $400,000 going into reserves this year. So there's $350,000 out there somewhere. What happened to that? 250,000, sorry.
So looking at the sheet here that's on the screen,
Yeah.
it is a bit misleading because the first column is as of March 31st, 2021. So all of the current year results are lumped into this first column.
Yeah.
So are you looking at?
I'm looking at. So
okay.
you got 2. If you turn it up a little bit higher, I'd be able to see the number. But I can't. There we go. You get $2.9 million at the end of this year, 3.35. So you've got whatever that is, $450,000. So there's $200,000 out there somewhere. Is that the stuff that went back into operational expenses?
It should all be accounted for here.
This is cash. This is cash,
right? True.
Versus positive variance to budget. So, like, this is sort of these are the bank account balances versus the other number was the operating operating surplus.
Well, I understand that, but the actuals are the actuals here to
right.
March 31st, 2021. That's now. And the estimated ones for next year are what we budgeted, correct?
Right.
So the difference, we had a surplus of 650K income versus expenses, and 450 went into reserves, if I read this correctly. So 200,000 went somewhere else. That's all I want to know, where it went.
I'll have to look further into that one, Kelly, and I may email you or something just to get confirmation on where I'm going.
Sure. I think I know. I think it's what these twos and fro's where you have it going into the reserve and then it comes back out to pay a salary
I
or
think
this
that's
or
where
that.
Yeah.
But I just wondered if you could clarify that a bit.
While this is, like Joe said, is a great sort of illustration as to where we stand, you definitely missed some detail in the comings and goings of the fund and stuff.
Listen, I concur totally with Councillor Feeney. This is remarkably good compared to where we were when I was on council in terms of fiscal sensibility. You have no problem with me on that.
Sounds good. And I will get back to you on that question once I get that information figured out. Any other questions before we move on?
Nope.
Okay. So here, this is just a graphical representation based on this is sort of where we are now as far as debt capacity goes. Then based on our current capital budget, as it stands now in the draft budget, just sort of projecting where our debt capacity is going to go. One thing I will note is that with the funding that we're hoping to receive for some of our larger capital projects, you can see that this is the line for the town's debt value, but this is the line for the asset value. So you see that the asset value is growing substantially more than the actual cost the town is incurring. So hopefully we'll get some of those matching funds and stuff, and we can knock off some of these infrastructure projects in the coming year.
I know that one's a little bit of an arcane graphical representation, but I really love being able to demonstrate, this isn't just money that just goes out the door. Capital Work is providing the town with these assets that we use for many, many years. In fact, many of the assets we currently have in use date back as far as the 40s. And we'll be using any assets we're putting in the ground today for that many years to come. So yeah, great to see the ability to leverage those big investments.
Moving along this next section, we're looking at the operating initiatives which are contained in the operating budget that we previously looked at. This year we did break it out based on town general, fire, actually I don't think there are any fire, but electric utility, water utility, to provide some greater clarity. And if it is desired, I can include these numbers in the specific expense categories within the budget, just to provide that extra sort of insight into where the operating initiatives are included.
Another thing to note here on this page, Luke, is the strategic plan link column. So in the draft strategic plan document 2021 to 25 that council's been working on, we do detail in the sort of summaries that show the different actions over time, over the 4 years of the plan. It does indicate whether those actions are an operating initiative or a capital initiative. So anything that's in that plan that notes that it's an operating initiative and that shows up as taking place in 21-22 is going to have a corresponding operating initiative here in the budget. And that's just sort of showing the link between the strategic plan and the budget. Many of the strategic plan items are either capital or they end up here in the operating initiative section. So just wanted to note that's where quite a number, most of these, all these ones on this page, are directly linked into items in the strategic plan. So just wanted to comment on that.
Mayor, okay.
I'm sorry, Councillor Feeney.
Sorry. Just on, pardon me, I guess I'm on, sorry, Luke, I'm a bit ahead of you. I'm on number 6. So what Edgewater and Main intersection are we talking about the cenotaph here? Is that what when I read that, conduct and study and design alternatives to the intersection of Edgewater and Main, is that saying spend $8,000 to talk about doing something around the cenotaph traffic circle? Is that what we're trying to do?
It's a roundabout.
So I'm the traffic authority. It says on recommendation traffic authority. That was my little tip of the hat to taking Luke off of having to explain this one. So this is on my recommendation. When we went through the process with CBCL last year, our transportation planning process, there was essentially a flag on the intersection of Edgewater and Main does not meet current standards. There are some significant considerations there from an engineering perspective and as traffic authority. So I feel as traffic authority, it's my responsibility to advise council that we do need to look at the configuration of that intersection. The best way to start that process is to do a study that takes into account the geographic area, the usage patterns, and is able to formulate recommendations for the intersection. So that's what's suggested here. I'm not suggesting a course of action, but I do feel that it would be inappropriate as traffic authority for me to suggest that the status quo there was acceptable, essentially.
So what we're hearing in this public meeting, that you as the traffic authority are suggesting that the cenotaph cannot remain there?
I wouldn't go that far, which is why we're hoping to do these studies, but it absolutely is not. The current configuration of the intersection should not continue. If we can make an effort to look at ways to improve the safety of the intersection, You know, hopefully there's one that works well for everyone, including anyone who's concerned about the cenotaph. But ultimately, you know, as traffic authority, I can't conscionably say that we should leave the intersection the way it is when we've had engineers looking at it and pointing out that there are issues with the configuration.
Well, I'm glad that is illuminated from the depths of line item 6. that is more than a 5-minute conversation.
Suffice it to say, CAO, that when the study is done, there will be a public engagement on the recommendations of the study before any decisions are taken.
Well, of course, but right now we don't have the ability to generate a conclusive recommendation without this information. So
No, that's
you know,
right.
we can have and have had a lot of public discussion about options, but I think what we really have to do, and my recommendation here, is that we do the work to formulate recommendations that actually can be actioned. We find out what they are, and then and then we can have that discussion with the community.
Okay. Any other comments?
Moving
Okay.
along. So here we've got the water utility initiative, the water system diagnostics, as mentioned previously. Looking at total cost of 60,000, 30,000 external funding through PCAP, hopefully. And then a couple electric utility operating initiatives, which are all included under that other expense line in the utility.
Luke, you had
So
Councillor Wilson's had a question, I think.
Oh, sure.
I'm just curious about the 60 grand for this water rates, this water study. When we discovered, when I was on council before, about 7 years ago, that we were losing roughly half our water, we got it down to about 20 to 25%. And as I recall, it was just grunt work done by staff. There was no $60,000 consulting fee necessary, et cetera. And I'm wondering what has changed.
Well, I can't really speak to the cited statistics there. We've talked to all the staff on staff currently, and we've looked at our water loss statistics that we're currently facing, and don't see an easy fix. So essentially, what this suggests is we'd be getting equipment to monitor flow levels and losses at different parts of the system. There's a lot of different options in terms of the equipment, but this would be, further developed into a concept of a project that would give us the data that we need to define where leaks are taking place. So, I understand there has been effort in the past to dig up lines. I think it's important that we work backwards from understanding where leaks are occurring. And so we've had a good conversation with our staff about what some of the different options for leak detection are. But I think no matter what, we'll be looking to make an effort to build out a budget and go to the province for support. So that's what this would anticipate.
Okay. Any other questions? Luke, please.
Okay. So we'll move along. I believe that was the end of the operating initiatives. So now we're starting into the capital budget. So this year we've got $802,000 of capital earmarked revenue as per past practice. Everything is remaining relatively normal. The only really big differential would be the double the gas tax this year, and also the $200,000 solar garden construction dividend. That really bumps us up this year. So out of that, we're taking the $73,000 for debt charges, $15,000 for town equipment reserve, $15,000 transfer to the wastewater reserve, which is what we took out of the operating budget this year. And then there's that $150,000 proposed transfer to operating reserve, which would then give us around $550,000 to be transferred to the capital reserve this fiscal year coming.
And Luke, are we also going to fund that pump reserve out of capital this year as well? That 10,000?
Yes, that was actually that 15,000. We bumped it up a little bit.
Okay.
Just because for the 10,000, sort of like that base level, let's get something in there as an earmark.
Okay.
And we'll just sort of revise that year over year from here on out. hopefully we'll eventually get the wastewater study done to get a better picture on what the actual cost of services and stuff, to get a more accurate representation of that number going forward.
I mean, I think, yeah, in the long run, when we're talking about replacement, we're really talking about a depreciation reserve like the water utility maintains. And obviously, there's a lot of other wastewater assets that are being depreciated. So the more funding that can be put aside for those replacements, the better.
Absolutely. I won't go through the capital budget in a lot of detail. It is a fairly lengthy component to the budget package, and I'm sure there's lots of conversation to be had here over the next, couple of weeks or whatever. One thing I will point out is that this year, the suggestion of the CAO is to provide the strategic plan link where it applies in the capital budget for reference sake. So that's there this year, which is an addition. And also we now have a description for each of the capital projects to provide better clarity and whatnot for council when they're reviewing this budget. So that's a couple little improvements that we added on to this year's budget package, which hopefully are useful. Are there any particular comments or questions or anything on the capital budget?
Luke, earlier you noted the connection to the different departments. So just to call back to that same point, on the department column here, if you were to go through and manually total up everything under one of these department headings, like environmental health, for example, or environmental development, that's how you would get the total non-operating number that Luke has associated in the operating budget with each of these, just to kind of connect the capital and operating budgets.
Right. And just at the end of each section, I'll note that at the end of every section, we've got sort of where the funds are coming from. So for town general, we've got 389 coming from the capital reserve, 12,000 from equipment reserve. We're looking to borrow 2.5 million from MFC long-term debt and hoping to receive 6.7 million from various ICIP funding type sources.
And most of those last two, borrowing and external funding, are tied up in the same project. So essentially the borrowing there would only proceed when leveraged with the external funding. And that's the few major wastewater line replacement projects, shoreline project, for example, which are all under general.
Correct. So moving on, this is the fire services capital budget. We've got the new fire station. The department are looking to get some new digital radios and pagers phased in. Currently, it's my understanding that a lot of the members, they are not able to get anything or any communication other than just the initial page. So there's a lot of information that's being missed between dispatch and the department. So we're looking to upgrade some radios and pagers for the members to be fully informed and stuff when they're responding. We're looking at replacing the pumper truck due to the insurance regulations this coming year. The latest number that I have from the fire department is in the $675,000 range, and that would be for a new pumper truck. And we're looking for a couple iPads as well for the vehicles for mapping purposes, for using their electronic database when they're on calls. So that was a request from the fire department that was included in this capital budget. And it was also noted that there's several pairs of expired bunker gear. So we're looking to get those replaced to ensure that our volunteer firefighters are kept safe when responding to emergency calls. And once again, it's just broken out based on the funding sources there again, as previously. And then we just go through it again here for the water utility with various projects.
We'll just note, well, on water, although there were a number of these for wastewater and there'll be a few for electrical, but you'll note a lot of these specify as needed or as required. And, that's essentially in order to do rate projections if there is a cost that is borne by the utility or by the town that's associated with new services, that generally will be budgeting for that cost here. And then we incur it if we need to, whether that's meters or laterals, etc.
Okay. And again, is the MFC borrowing contingent on the funding from the external source?
Yes, thank you.
Yes,
I
for water
didn't
utility.
note
Yep.
that for fire because that's not the case for fire, but it is the case for water.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, the fire is all on our hook.
And then we're looking at the capital budget for the electric utility. Some new infrastructure projects there just for getting everything hooked up for the new nursing home connections and stuff, which sort of has needed to be done over the last little bit, but it's been put off, I believe. So we're looking at getting that finally done this year with the nursing home coming on.
Well, I think generally this represents a more proactive take on replacement of lines and transformers. And I think we're going to be noting more and more need for that as we look at the age of our electrical system. So certain projects will push it, new development, whether it's town-led or private sector, but we are just starting to see, and you'll see some, I think more to come as we look at the age of our existing distribution infrastructure.
And then here at the end of the capital budget, we've just got, once again, some graphical representations based on the breakdown of funding sources. Here we
give
break
the
down
external, going to give the higher levels of government credit. I'll often point out that municipalities only receive, I think the statistic is 7% of public revenues in this country. And with 7%, we pay for more than 60% of public infrastructure. But ultimately, we do receive a lot, well, we hope to, generally do, receive a lot of support on that public infrastructure from other levels of government. So it's a good acknowledgement here that when we do major projects, we leverage that money and we're able to receive at least better than even support from other levels of government.
Mm.
And here just a further breakdown of the funds. And that's it for the capital budget. Are there any questions before we move on? Okay, I'll move along. This sheet here is just a comparison of the de-transfer rates across the province. Basically, we're with half the pack there at 1.5% currently.
And just a note for anyone who's not aware, 1.5 is the maximum that we're allowed to have there.
And moving along here, this is the 10-year capital budget. So everything in the 2021 column here would be contained in the above capital budget we just looked at. And then anything included 2022 and over are projected future projects that are sort of on the horizon, and we're just keeping in scope for the CIP reporting purposes.
It provides a good context for council members who may say, where did that idea go? Or, how does this fit with what we're looking to do next year? And we do continue to work on this. You'll note the latter years get a lot lesser in detail. And I think that we're going to be fleshing this out a lot more over the next 2 years per the asset management work that's ongoing. And council strategic plan notes the integration of our 10-year capital planning with the asset management data. So we try to fill out those future years better with understood projects that are coming. And when I was talking about the electric utility, for example, that we know we're going to have a transformer replacement schedule. We're just working towards being able to really quantify that out over the next 10 years.
Mayor, just a quick question. Are we, just when we're looking at that page, are we currently in fiscal year 2021 on that page?
No, so currently we are. So
April to April.
Right, so the budget that we're preparing and talking about right now is this 2021 year.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah. So I won't go into any too much detail. I mean, this is a lot of information just to sit back and, absorb, look at. If there's any specific questions, definitely feel free to let me know. If you're asking, where a project went or something like that, I can usually look at this and locate it for you if you're not able to. Definitely a great piece of information for conversation topics. But yeah, just a lot of detail on capital projects. And as Dylan mentioned, over the next couple of years, hopefully these, last 5 years will start to populate with some more information as we get some more pricing and projects on the scope.
Mhm.
And that's it for the capital budget, or the 10-year capital budget, I guess. Are there any questions on that and how it's presented or anything before we move along? Okay. So this here, the next 4 sheets are the comparative residential and commercial tax rates. These have not been updated, so these are still the 2019-20 rates that have not been updated on the provincial site. My understanding with talking with our municipal advisor is that essentially all units for the most part held their rates stable last year, so there were really no updates to be done. So for the most part, I would say that these are all current rates as of fiscal 2020-21, but I just wanted to have the little ear note that this is actually the 2019-20 comparative rates that you're looking at here.
And Luke, these are combined rates as well, so that's showing
These are combined, correct.
where we don't have fire right now, but for anybody who does, it's included in the general.
Correct. So this is just basically here as a information discussion topic. I mean, as you can see here, a residential tax rate is quite low amongst the other towns, but as it's been noted, our assessment values are one of the highest, so the tax burden is significantly higher than some of these other towns. So,
But you get to live here in Mahone Bay.
exactly, everybody's envious. So that's those sheets. This page here is the grants. So over here is what we received last year. This is what we granted last year, 2020-21 actuals. These are the applications received this year so far. So further on the budget deliberations, we'll sit down, get to review the applications, and decide how much, if we want to fund all of this, if we want to fund partial of it, do we want to have any set aside for any potential further applicants throughout the year. So this will definitely be a conversation topic. This last column I will update as council discusses it to sort of have this be an actual grants provided during the fiscal year. But right now it just matches the grants received as we haven't had that conversation quite yet.
And typically that's one of the sort of, we earmark a specific part of one of our budget discussions, typically, you know, third or fourth, and go through these. Councilors will get the whole package of everything we received and be able to review the application.
And here are the subsidies. These are all numbers that are included in the operating budget, but they're just various subsidies that are given out, and I just provide here as a high level sort of breakout point as an informational piece only.
Councillor Carver.
Thank you. I was just going to jump in because I don't think you saw me. On the previous list, can you tell me who the South Shore Tourism Cooperative? What is that group?
Luke, do you want me to field that one?
Sure.
So Penny South Shore Tourism Cooperative was established, I think, about 5 years ago after the major restructuring of tourism entities in southern Nova Scotia. This one is composed of municipalities supporting and a large number of businesses up and down the shore. I know, you know, Oak Island Resort, for example, locally is very active with it, a number of other local entities. But essentially they promote tourism, organize events like the Lobster Crawl, which became a pretty prominent one. That was the South Shore Tourism Cooperative Initiative. And I think their AGM's tomorrow, if you're interested in learning more. It's a virtual AGM. So we are supporter level. We've done the same level of support for them, which is, I think, the base level for municipalities.
Thank you. All that rejigging of tourism associations is coming back to me now. So thank you for that.
Any other questions here before we move along?
You're good.
Okay. And as mentioned, just these are the subsidies contained in the operating budget, just broken out here for informational purposes only. And here is the 2021-22 tax exemptions. We've got the Mahone Bay Center, the Water Utility Plant, Founder Society. And then this is the commercial portion of a property. This one here, you have to apply to get this designation. This is the only property in the town that has actually applied, so that's why there's only one property listed there. And this amount here is what you'll see on the general government tax exemption expense. So I just broke out all that information here, which is already contained in the operating budget. And that is the end of the document, with 3 minutes to spare.
Ta-da! Huge piece of work. Luke, well done.
That it is. Thank you.
A lot to cover in 2 hours, so thanks very much, Luke. And obviously, we'll have lots of time to dig into more questions that people have from here.
Absolutely.
So the next sitting for the budget discussion is 22nd?
This Thursday, April 22nd at 7 p.m. And
Yep.
back here on Zoom and on YouTube.
There you go. Anything else? You've all got your reading assignments for Thursday night? Anything else? Hearing nothing, entertain a motion to adjourn. So moved by Councillor Now. Do we have a seconder? Deputy Mayor Kanga.